Welcome to episode 29 of Published. Today I'll speak with Ken Sterling, Executive Vice President and Chief Learning Officer at BigSpeak Speakers Bureau, about the ways authors can enhance their books and brands through speaking.
Welcome to Published, a podcast by Greenleaf Book Group, where we'll discuss the ins and outs of the publishing industry, from writing a book and finding the right publisher to gearing up for a book launch. And now, here's your host, Greenleaf Book Group CEO, Tanya Hall.
Welcome back to Published. In today's episode, we're branching out from the writing and production side of publishing to explore how authors can build their brands and promote their books through speaking. Speaking engagements are a great way to build an audience for your book, and they can provide an added stream of income. That said, the prospect of speaking can be daunting for first-time authors and those just starting to build their brands because it can be difficult to know where to start and how to translate a book into a speech. To help explain the ins and outs of the speaking world and how authors can navigate it, we're joined by Ken Sterling, Executive Vice President and Chief Learning Officer at the Speakers Bureau, BigSpeak. Ken has decades of experience as a business leader, speaker, and marketer, and now he specializes in connecting talented speakers with the right audiences to create unique events. Let's get into the interview. Ken, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast.
You're welcome.
We're looking forward to learning from you. So can you maybe start by telling us a little bit about BigSpeak and what your role is there?
Yes, and I think what I'll do is take us down memory lane a little bit. We today say that we're a 23-year-old startup. We weren't always BigSpeak, though. We actually were founded as an idea in a hot tub at the Esalen Institute. And for
This
those
is getting good.
Oh, it's good. And for those of you who don't know California but have all of your stereotypes, Esalen is one of those mountain retreats up in Big Sur where you sit in yurts and meditate or levitate or, do all those cool things. And then they have these communal hot tubes. And by the way, clothing optional, just little spoiler alert and warning, because sometimes people come back and they say, you never told me they had naked people in the hot tubs. So our CEO, Jonathan, he had sold a company. He was up there for a retreat in the hot tub, and he got this idea of bringing corporate consciousness to Fortune 1000 companies. In other words, integrity, doing things better, treating your people better. So, this is the mid-90s where everyone's super greedy. No one can spell consciousness, let alone wants to buy it. So this little kind of fledgling company was around doing its thing called Consciousness Unlimited. We didn't have Google back then. So, needless to say, sales were not brisk and business was not growing. Right around the millennium coming on, New Year's Eve, he and his wife had a kind of a New Year's party and having some champagne, and they said, maybe we should change the name to BigSpeak, and maybe we should go a little more kind of general corporate audience. So our joke is once our initials became BS, things started to take off.
Well, Consciousness Unlimited is a little California, isn't it?
For sure. And again, I'm a bad speller, so people had a hard time finding it. And so what we've done since then, really since the early 2000s, is we have become the leading speakers bureau for business topics. So there are major bureaus, for example, on the East Coast who handle politicians. There are other bureaus who handle big celebrities. We're really the largest bureau that focuses on business. We're going to do about 1,600 events this year. Most of those are in businesses or organizations or associations dealing with topics such as leadership, innovation, change, human resources, marketing, etc. So we occasionally book politicians or occasionally book celebrities, but a big part of what we do is what I call needle moving, where a company wants to come in and move needles, and they'll bring in a business thought leader to do that.
Mm-hmm. And what do you specifically do? Are you the person who makes those connections?
I am the chief cook and bottle washer. If you look me up on the team page, I'm the executive vice president. So Barrett, our president, and I are running the company. And I'm very involved with the talent, with the authors. I also do a lot on our marketing side. So those are kind of the two areas that I'm really covering are, meeting awesome new speakers, being out at events, checking them out, We've gotten a lot more intentional. So, for example, this year we have an official exclusive speaker division and talent division. So we hired a manager. We've got a couple other people in the department, and we're very intentional about those connections and who we're onboarding.
Mm-hmm. And do you see a concentration, I suppose, of speakers who come out of a certain genre? You mentioned business.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still sort of your sweet spot, or do you tend to have others like maybe health and wellness, parenting even?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can run us through that range.
Sure. So if you look at this year, for example, the 1,600 events that we're going to do, I would project probably about 1,200-ish of those events. So about 75% of those events will be business topics. In other words, we're speaking with a client and they have a need for innovation or leadership or change management. And we're working on those folks. The other couple hundred events that we're going to be working on are, we have an open canvas, or we're bringing in 3 other business thought leaders, and we say, hey, maybe the program's a little thick on content. Let's bring someone in about mindfulness, or about emotional intelligence, or about health and wellness, or work-life balance, or work culture. Maybe what we could call softer skills or softer topics.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. That's very interesting. And so we work with a lot of speakers here at Greenleaf Book Group. We tend to have a list that is prescriptive nonfiction, as we would call it. Mm-hmm. And having spent lots of time around authors/speakers, I know, as you probably know, that just like publishers, they're quick to be, an agency is quick to be thrown under the bus. So what would you say for someone who's maybe wrestling with, should I work with an agency or should I just go it alone? Because I hear people complain that all they do is take a cut of my money. What would your answer be to that person? What's the benefit of working with a bureau?
Sure. And I have some good thoughts on that, but I wanted to backtrack for 1 second. For my own purpose and for some of the listeners, could you explain what prescriptive nonfiction is?
Sure, that's a very fair question, and that's definitely sort of a book business term. Prescriptive nonfiction is nonfiction that's teaching you how, it's actionable content that's teaching you how to do something better. So many of the areas that you just mentioned in terms of leadership and management and health and wellness, there's something specific you can do versus it just being maybe philosophical or commentary type nonfiction piece.
Very helpful. In what we do, we usually call that practical takeaways or applicable takeaways. So that makes a lot of sense. And that's a big part of our world, which is great. So back to your question, why a speakers bureau? What's the value add for bringing in an agency or having somebody else handle things? And there's a lot of different checklisty bullet point things that I can share in a minute. But the first thing is something that I say to people, and I say this when I'm meeting with them over lunch or dinner. And it's something that my grandpa said, and it's better to have someone else brag on you rather than brag it on yourself. Right?
Very true.
And the thing is, a person's a speaker. First of all, they're an author, and they wrote a great book, and they have a vision of what they think is a great speech. So the first kind of check mark there is your speech really great? Who's in your corner with you, coaching you and helping you, saying, hey, that's a great presentation, you should tune it up these 3 ways, or hey, I read your book and it was awesome, and you did a really good job of telling everybody a chapter summary of your book, but they didn't get engaged. You weren't bringing them in with story. Let's put more story into your... So those are advisory things that a good agency and a good advisor will do with a speaker. So not just be an order taker, but to be someone who actually helps connect with getting that story to really mesh and engage with audiences. So that's high level. On kind of the business minutia part of the bullet points, typically using an agency results in higher gross fees. Even when you factor in paying an agency fee, speakers are usually making more money. They've got somebody else who can be the bad guy, especially if it's an organization that they know or they've had connections with. People are very good at kind of leveraging those and, we really need a good deal. And most people that I know in the world and in the speaking world are very nice people, and they have a really hard time saying no. So Boy Scout Troop 34 over in Wichita, Kansas, really needs a speaker, and we really feel like your motivational message and your 3 actionable takeaways would be so great for these young boys. Like, how do you say no to that? So having a third party that can do that can kind of be air traffic control, that can do the contracting, the invoicing, the billing, all of those things really brings value. And let's remember, the person who's up on stage wrote a great book. We're going to make them a great speaker. Typically, those aren't the same people who are really good with details or chasing money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very fair points. And as an author or a prospective speaker, I guess, is making that choice, how do they vet the bureau? What are they looking for?
Great question. And that's usually how I kind of start the conversation. After we talk about, are you married? Are you teaching at a university? How's your book doing? All these kind of the little small talk that segues into it. That's one of the first questions I ask. And I ask them, what are you looking for? What are some of the things that you've liked with the other bureaus? Or what I also say is, have you worked with bureaus much? Yes or no. Oh, what are some of the things that you're enjoying about working with the bureaus? What are some things you're not enjoying about working with the bureaus? And what I very quickly do is I come from a place of fairness. So if they're describing an issue within the industry that they view as problematic, I'm not going to throw a bureau under the bus and say, oh, they're terrible, we do it better. I'll say, oh, that I totally understand. We hear that a lot, and probably regardless of whatever bureau you go with, those kinds of challenges are going to come up. But then as I start learning about exactly what they're looking for, the other thing is, what do you want to do with your speaking career? And, they kind of look back blankly. Do you want to speak 10 times, 20 times, 30 times? And that conversation we had about family 6 minutes earlier ties into this. I've got a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old and one on the way. And I'll usually say, hey, to me, that says you're probably going to have to be home more, to be with family and things like that. So just keying into that and kind of understanding where they want to go with their vision and what they really want to do is super, super helpful. And then going back to the bureau thing of, okay, these are the activities you're expecting from a bureau. You want them to help market you. You want them to bring in new business. You want them to handle the logistics. You want them to get your fee up, those kinds of things. Then we can almost reverse engineer into what kind of a bureau or management company there would be, because there are speaking bureaus and there are also management companies, and they're very, very different, and explaining that difference too.
Could you give us a quick explanation of that difference?
Sure. So a speaker's bureau tends to be a little more proactive. They have speakers, they're out there interfacing with the direct public. They're out there doing marketing pieces, doing visits. They have a large Rolodex of clients. So for example, BigSpeak, we have been around 23 years. We have in our database 40,000 clients, mostly at Fortune 1000 companies. So these are 40,000 different people who hire speakers. So we're in touch with them. They're coming back to us asking for recommendations. Speakers bureaus have those kind of relationships where we're able to fill more capacity based on the relationships we have. A speaker manager would be much like a business manager, somebody who waits for the leads to come in, somebody who writes checks and who sends contracts, and that's about it. Maybe handles some logistics, but they're not really on the sales and marketing side. So that's really the nuance there between a management company and a speaker's bureau. Management company is very admin and very reactive, and a speaker's bureau is more sales and marketing and more proactive.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. And then that relationship would typically be an exclusive one, right?
That's a great question. Maybe, maybe not. So, for example, if you look at a big bureau like WSB, for example, who mostly deals with politicians, I think if you go to their website, they probably have maybe 1,500 speakers, and out of those 1,500 speakers, about 200 are exclusively represented. If you go to our site, we have about 3,000 speakers. And out of those 3,000 speakers, about 50 are exclusive just with us, and maybe another 1,000 are co-broker, meaning that they're listed with other bureaus, but we have wholesale relationships with them. And then the rest of them are what I call free agents. So people reach out to them directly. They reach out through multiple bureaus and those kinds of things.
Okay, good. Interesting. So going back to our audience who are mostly authors listening to our podcast here, in your experience, how does speaking benefit the book, and probably vice versa? Like how do the book and the speaking career interplay?
That's a great question. And this also goes back to that meeting of why a speakers bureau. What I'm very careful about when I speak to the authors about, especially about upcoming books or just about speaking engagements in general, even the best speakers bureau, for example, BigSpeak, we have a huge marketing reach. We're noticed within the industry. We're noticed in the general public as being very aggressive with a very large digital footprint. Even us, we're not star makers. The real star maker thing comes out of the author, and it comes out of a couple things. First of all, is your book amazing? Is it is it accessible? Do people connect with it? Did it get great reviews? Did it make some of the lists? That's the book. Then, okay, now looking at them as a speaker. What kind of speaking exposure have you done? Have you been on a TED stage? Have you done South by Southwest? Is your talk, does it have 1 million views or 14 million views? And as you start looking at those things, that's really driving the speaking demand. So that's kind of door number one. Door number two is we have clients who have never heard of the speaker, and they say, we have an event in New York City on April 2nd, and we're looking for specialists in innovation. And then we, based on our kind of ranking system of maybe 5 or 6 different innovation speakers, would put those 5 or 6 innovation speakers, including could be an innovation speaker from Greenleaf Book Group, for example. We put them on the proposal with our strong recommend. So we would never build a proposal based on a speaker that we hadn't watched video footage of, most likely hadn't seen live, most likely haven't booked with other clients. So those are some of the kind of the activities and differentiators that we do in terms of how we onboard a speaker. And then in terms of kind of getting back to the exact question of what drives what, is it chicken or the egg? Is it the book? Is it the speaking? It's both. Mm-hmm. But it's really a lot of it does come down to that author/speaker. I'd say 80 to 85%, which is not what a lot of bureaus say. A lot of bureaus, when they're kind of trying to just land grab and sign as many speakers as they can, we're going to get you 50 events. We're going to get you $40,000 an event. This is going to be amazing. And then they sign with that bureau, and 2 years later, they did 6 events at $7,500, and they're wondering what happened. Mm-hmm. We believe, let's be transparent. Let's set good expectations. I'm not going to say any names, but we have a couple really high-performing speakers with us. One of them is a woman who will do 120 events this year, which, if you do the math and you subtract weekends, because most events are during the week, she's pretty much living on airplanes. Yeah. So for her, most of her demand comes from her. In other words, she's out there, she's hustling, she's got a great reputation, there's a lot of spin. We get leads that say, we saw you at this conference, we want to bring you into this conference. So she's a great example of somebody who really has tons of demand. Yes, we're marketing her. Yes, we're pushing her to new channels, and we are getting kind of organic new work for her. But she has so much momentum that it's just this freight train that's just going down the tracks. And she has a book, but with her, it's really her speaking that's driving book sales at this point. Now we have another person who, a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, was doing these workshops kind of in Marriott's and conference rooms and, doing a good job. And we discovered the speaker and said, we think you really fill a void in the marketplace, would really like to work with you. And now booking that person 70 to 80 times a year at $25,000 to $30,000 per gig. Now, here's the best part. I left the book out. Oops. He just published his book 6 months ago. So he was getting all the speaking business and all these workshops based on video footage and based on his content. And now the book is a cool nice to have that people buy. So 300 people are going to be in the audience. There are practical takeaways. And as we're on the pre-call, we say, by the way, the talk is really good. The book is really great gift to give to audience members and to lock in those practical takeaways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And we often hear that in the speaking world, a book is a legitimizer. Would you say that that's true?
It is. I call it uncertainty reduction. And my grandpa didn't say this to me, but my uncle did. He said, you never get fired for hiring IBM. So you got to imagine event managers at these Fortune 1000 companies. They're sitting in their office, or these days an open plan. They're sitting in kind of their work pod, and their boss says, I need an innovation speaker. And they contact multiple bureaus, send out some LinkedIn things. And at the end of the day, they're looking for 3 things to be sure they're not going to get fired: video, books, and testimonials. So books is a big part of that, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And so you've done a lot of work developing directly, I suppose, and also watching people develop from author to author speaker. Mm-hmm. I suppose there's probably some challenges in trying to translate what sometimes works well on a page to stage. What kind of challenges do you see there, and what should somebody be thinking about as they start to consider perhaps making that move themselves from author to author speaker from a content perspective?
That's a great question, and it's probably the favorite part of what I do. But that's the second part. My most favorite part is meeting really cool people and being part of the space that we're in of thought leadership. The next part is really tuning those talks up in a graceful way. I'm never going to say, oh, that was awful. I go, I watch, I take some notes, I talk about the things that they did really well. The biggest number one thing, and I'd mentioned it before, is story. We don't want an executive summary of your book. We could buy that online. We could do that. Come out, tell us something funny. Even if it's about, what your kid threw at you for breakfast yesterday, or, but that relates to it. Not just, don't be one of those people that whips out pictures of your kids, but, something funny, something engaging story. So take that 40 minutes. Oh, by the way, I recommend that a keynote should never be more than about 40 to 45 minutes. People, they zone out. Mm-hmm. You should be able to get the point of your book or what you're talking about. I think the other thing is, don't make it like your TED Talk, and don't make it exactly like your book, because otherwise people can watch your TED Talk for nothing, or they can buy your book or a book summary. So what is it I don't know? What are the things that you didn't explain in the book? Or what are the fun stories behind what you did? So that's the underscore, big, bold, italics, underlined, story, story, story.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I was just speaking with a speaker the other day who, it just rubbed me as a little strange. She was very concerned about video of her presentation being shared. This was a webinar for a business community I'm a part of. And I remember thinking to myself, nobody, if you're doing it right, you're the person who can deliver this in your own unique way. And those stories are yours. And maybe somebody watches it and iterates on it, but if that's your concern, if that's a real concern, I don't think you're doing it right.
Yeah, good point. And I'd be curious to learn more about, what was the concern? Was the concern more about, will people like me? Is this going to sound good? Or, hey, I'm putting my content out there? Because I think there's different layers, and we deal with that all the time. And people tend to, it's funny, I call somebody up and like, hey, I got a speaking invitation for you. And they're like, great. Where is it? Bismarck, North Dakota. Oh, it's cold there. Yep. How many people is it? 450. Wow, that's a lot of people. And, and then I'm like, oh, by the way, they want to record it. Oh my God. So it's funny. These people can get up and speak in front of hundreds or thousands of people. But when you throw a camera into the mix, it definitely, we tend to frame that out as, oh, there's going to be an archive of our mistakes. And typically, I've definitely seen some speakers not always hit all their speaking points, but I've never seen anyone embarrass themselves. So I think cameras, recording are great. It's a good way to also kind of self-critique or meet with your agent, for example, and watch some of the footage. It's good publicity. So I generally recommend to, allow videotaping and allow the talk to be publicized, or portions of the talk for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this has been super interesting. Do you have any parting advice for our aspiring author speakers?
Sure. I think the big thing is get out there. So depending on where somebody is, and we get this a lot, we actually get about 30 inquiries a day for people who want to be speakers. And for the ones that either I get involved in or my team gets involved with because we find them interesting, we say, do you have a book? Yes or no. Do you have footage? Yes or no. So we say, especially if they don't have footage and they haven't really been up on the stage, just get up there. Find some things, even if you have to go to local Toastmasters or local TEDx events or something, just get up on stage, just start doing it. And as you do it, you're going to learn what feels better. And watch yourself, and again, the power of story in all of your presentations. So it's really do it and getting story woven in, and everybody gets better. All the speakers that we've kind of started out with, from kind of their humble beginnings until today, commanding $50,000 or $100,000, and they're knocking it out of the park, former executives of big tech companies, their first couple of talks were rough. There are lots of ums, and the clicker didn't work right, and you just got to do it, and you just got to keep moving on, and it's going to get better.
Mm-hmm. It's not unlike writing.
Exactly. It's not unlike a lot of things we do, and it's speaking not being an exception.
Yeah, fantastic. And if people want to learn more about potentially working with BigSpeak, how can they do so?
Oh, I love shameless plugs. Just go to bigspeak.com, and we've got a lot of great information on our homepage, and there are submission forms where you can get on our database for newsletters for speakers, for anything that you want to do. And then, of course, any folks that you ever would want to refer over would give special consideration to.
Oh, well, thank you, Ken. And we certainly appreciate you joining us on the podcast today. And I hope everybody learned quite a lot about speakers bureaus.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for our episode today. We hope you learned a lot and feel confident to get started on your own speaking career. For notes and resources from today's show, go to greenleafbookgroup.com/episode 29. You can also find advice for writing, publishing, and promoting your work, including speaking, in my book, Ideas, Influence, and Income, which you can learn more about at ideasinfluenceandincome.com. If you've enjoyed our show, please rate and review us on iTunes. It means a lot to have your feedback, and it will help us make sure we're answering your most burning publishing questions. We'll be back next month with another new episode.
Thanks for listening to Published. To learn more, please visit greenleafbookgroup.com. And remember to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes.